The style of the early books, there is clearly a project to remake English. I mean, a title you later used, The War Against Cliché, for a book of essays. It's American influenced, I suppose, but it's getting away from the classic English sentences. I mean, it's often been quoted, but it's very apposite. The conversation you had with your father where he said he wanted more sentences in your books, such as they walked across the room and poured themselves a drink, and you were determined not to write them. But it was fresh expression in every sentence, if possible.
Yeah, he called that remorseless vividness, he says, which exhausts the reader. And I always said that he should have fewer sentences like that in his stuff, and maybe I should have one or two, but he should definitely have fewer. It's not sort of worked up, it's not cranked up, it's just how a sentence seems to ask you to write it. It's not an effort of will, it's sometimes an effort of patience.
The case against the books which people have mounted, it started quite early on, the charge of coldness. Now, it's very odd to anyone who's read a lot of you and has met you over the years, because you are quite an emotional person, I think, and quite an emotional writer. But that charge, I think, came from the energy, the aggression of the writing.
I don't know whether it was a question of when you were born or what the traditions that fed into you were, but there was always a feeling that you should control emotion very carefully. You thought there's plenty there, but it is controlled. But I think someone asked me what did my novels learn from, as so to speak, from writing experience, a memoir. And I suppose it was that emotion should be more present, or you should not seek to control it quite so sternly, that you should give it a bit more elbow room. And I think this novel and its predecessor, House of Meetings, do indulge feeling a bit more than I would have felt happy with years ago.
Another charge which came quite early on was of misogyny. I remember having these arguments with girlfriends in the past. We don't read Martin Amis. Martin Amis is a man's writer, but I think, looking back and reading them again, there was a misunderstanding that you are honest about the male psyche and male behavior with grotesque comic exaggeration. The assumption of a lot of people was that you were endorsing it all.
When an issue gets politicized, then there are all these sort of triggers that set off alarm bells. And if you in your novel you have something about rape or something of that kind, then alarm bells go off. And I know what it's like to be politicized. I've occasionally got politicized on certain questions, and it's very distorting. The misogyny objection is partly a response to the genre, which is social realism shading into satire, where everything's exaggerated again, more intensely. And you're just not going to get the woman character who has 5 children and a high-powered job and is also, a very interesting amateur painter. You're not going to get her. What would she be doing in a book by me,
It's possible that, having read a lot of your novels again in sequence for this interview, it is possible to take away the depressing conclusion that cooperative monogamy between men and women is in the end impossible, that there will be either sexual desire or differing expectations will destroy it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the institution of marriage exactly parallels what Churchill said about democracy. Marriage is the worst possible arrangement between a man and a woman, except for all the others. But I've been very lucky in the end, second time. I have great respect for the institution of marriage. I don't see it working universally well all around me, but it can work, and it's a marvelous thing. And nothing is better than I don't want to sound like David Cameron, but nothing is better than having your children and your wife and in middle class comfort. It is a desirable goal.
And in The Pregnant Widow, the most recent novel, I thought it had an interesting relationship with your second novel, Dead Babies, which is set in the 70s and is about a group of young people spending time together, not in such magnificent surroundings, perhaps. Was there a conscious relationship, and what did you think of returning to that time and that setting?
It did occur to me that this is a country house weekend novel, just as Dead Babies was, although the suspense there was who was the murderer, as is usual in those novels, but the suspense in this novel is not about a death, it's about a sexual act. Kenrick, too, was the child of a pregnant widow. It happened early on in the second trimester, fast convertible, summer rain. So, for 5 months, the vanished father, the unborn son, and the mother both lamenting and expecting, the black weeds or threads, but also the familiar curve of the silhouette, with the profile poised like a question mark between life and death. And the old order gives way to the new, not immediately though, not yet. The filled breasts and weakened knees, the cravings, the broken waters, the pumping womb, and labor, labor, labor.
I also know from interviewing you on and off for almost 20 years now that The Pregnant Widow was originally a very different book. It was declared as an openly autobiographical novel in which there was a version of you, there was a version of Saul Bellow, there were direct versions of other people. But all that has gone, that was thrown out.
It was abandoned. I had a terrible couple of weeks where I realized that this endless novel I was writing, and that had no end in sight and was already, perhaps 600-700 pages, was dead. Now, it's a funny quality. When you're writing about life and trying to make it fiction of some kind, certainly not a memoir, life is dead, isn't that peculiar? It lies there inert and turgid because it's not, what the novelist does is inject symmetries and epiphanies and bestiaries and unities above all, and streamlines reality so that it tells, so that it can be told in an enjoyable way and stimulating way. But life is just one damn thing after another. So I had to face up to this, and I abandoned it. And I thought for a couple of weeks, that is my writing life over. But then I, tiptoed back to it and realized that it was, in fact, 2 books, 2 novels. This is one bit of it, and and not autobiographical. And that's why it was it was an oasis of fiction in this autobiographical novel. It was something I had largely made up. And I liked it because it was fictional. So I expanded that, and it was an incredible joy to get back to the freedom of fiction, where instead of being the chronicler of your own existence, you are once again in a godlike relation to what you put down on the page. You could have absolutely anything happen. And I could obey Philip Roth's dictum that you don't write about what happened, you write about what didn't happen.
And there are visible threads of autobiography still, I think, in The Pregnant Widow. We partly know this because you've written about your own life and experience. But, for example, there's a story you've told before about this great protective joy you felt when your sister Sally was born, which is given to Keith in relation to his own sister. There's a game you've described playing with your friend Christopher Hitchens in which, in a title such as Affairs of the Heart, the word heart is substituted with Dick, and there are variations on this, and that again is given to Keith. So there are still parts of it as semi-memoir.
Yes, and I gave him my height. He won't thank me for that.
And he has your birth date, but 2 days displaced, I think, is it?
No, I don't remember displacing it. I think he meant to have my birthday. The original character was, of course, me, and
Was he called Martin Amis?
No, in fact, he was unnamed.